our Seraphim.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Generation Space podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome Kevin Stein from Delos Insurance Solutions. Driven by climate change, wildfires are becoming more prevalent and severe. Highly regulated insurance markets such as California also make it difficult for legacy insurers to build profitable portfolios. Delos is making this easier. Using proprietary algorithms to analyze satellite imagery and high-resolution weather forecasts, Delos can more accurately price wildfire risk to offer wildfire cover as part of homeowner insurance policies. They also work directly with homeowners to harden their homes to reduce premiums, but I'll let Kevin tell you more about that in a moment. Hi, welcome, Kevin.
Thank you, Leah. I'm happy to be here.
And I'm also joined today by Seraphim VP Investment Lewis Jones, who you know from the podcast before.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And before I go into the questions, I couldn't begin other than saying congratulations, Kevin, on your recent fundraise. You've recently raised $9 million, so congratulations to you on the team on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, and very happy to have Seraphim in that round as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Right, I know everyone's excited to hear more. Kevin, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you first got into the space industry?
Sure. Yeah. My background, interestingly enough, right, I spend my entire day, every day in the insurance industry at this point. And if you told me that in grad school that I would be deeply in the insurance industry, I would have asked, where did my life go wrong? But the reality is I am very, very excited to be doing what we're doing. So my background is aerospace. I got my master's from Stanford in aerospace engineering. Mechanical systems actually is my trade, and then went off and worked in satellites and satellite imagery, spacecraft design for a long time. Worked in some large companies, worked in some startups, and actually started a space hardware startup myself. That only lasted about 1.5 to 2 years, and we ended up shutting that down ourselves because we think the opportunity just wasn't there at that time. But then in 2017, that's when myself and my co-founder, Shanna McIntyre, we recognized an opportunity to take new satellite imagery and model wildfire in higher spatial resolution, drilling down to the address level, but also temporal resolution, get an understanding of how changing climate conditions impacts exposure over time. We quickly realized that the best way to be able to operationalize that and the most effective way to actually protect homes is by becoming an insurance carrier or insurance provider, I should say, and selling home insurance policies across the Western U.S.
And that sounds like you're a technical founder and your co-founder is also technical.
Yes, in the sense that Shanna's background is physics and predictive modeling. My background is, aerospace engineering. Running an insurance provider doesn't necessarily relate exactly to either of those, though Shanna does work on a lot of our modeling at this point. We're technical people, not necessarily working in technical roles at the moment.
Can you tell everyone a bit about the history of the company? You did touch upon it, but how did it all begin and what is the mission today?
So back in 2017, we recognized that there was a very big oncoming set of disasters as it relates to wildfire. At that moment, before the Tubbs and Thomas fire in California in 2017, most insurance companies were not recognizing wildfire as an actual threat. Therefore, they were not spending much time or resources modeling it really that accurately. And since then, it's become very clear that wildfire is simply a different peril than it used to be. If you look back at the numbers, they're pretty dramatic. 9 out of the 10 largest wildfires has happened in California's history has happened since 2017. But if you peel back the onion one layer, just really look at what happened, you start realizing that there's a lot more to it. The reality is wildfire as a peril is evolving at a much faster rate than ever before. 2017 introduced us to this new type of wildfire behavior, the big wind-driven urban conflagration with the Tubbs fire up in wine country, the Thomas fire in LA. 2018 showed us that this type of behavior can happen in different geographies with a campfire out in the Sierra Nevadas. 2020 introduced us to yet again another type of wildfire behavior, the dry lightning ignition event. We had over 1,000 lightning strike ignitions over the course of one night with no rain whatsoever. That behavior does happen in other geographies, but had not happened in the Bay Area in over 100 years. 2021 introduced us to yet again another type of wildfire behavior. We actually had a fire that created its own fire climate and fueled itself. The point is, more than half of the years recently had a new type of fire behavior. If you look at the way in which the insurance industry was approaching solving for insuring properties in wildfire affected areas, it's a strategy that works very well in a static environment, but simply does not work anymore in a dynamic climate-affected environment. And that's where you have a team of actuaries and third-party data models working through standard actuarial techniques where you want to take years, if not decades, of loss history and use that as your entire way of predicting the losses of the next year. If you have a peril that changes almost every year, that doesn't work. We realized that this disconnect, when it was going to cause insurance companies to take on a lot of losses, which has absolutely happened here in California over the last 8 years, and then make the only decision they could as a good risk manager, which is if you don't understand a peril, you can't participate in the sector. And then they were going to pull out, causing significant strife across the Western US. We saw this coming. This has exactly happened as we expected, more dramatically, honestly, than we expected. And so in 2017, we set up to create an insurance provider, a group that has climate modeling and wildfire modeling vertically integrated into all levels, and be able to use that to be able to understand how the peril is changing on a regular basis and be able to not only survive in a very dynamic environment, but thrive, because our system and our underwriting, our pricing, our wildfire modeling is built off of the concept that we have to stay ahead of the changes in the peril, not adjust after the fact.
And also I read that, it's not just the changing conditions, but they weren't adapting to human factors like fire suppression, that kind of thing. Maybe you can tell everyone a bit more about that.
Yeah. So there are a number of different factors that go into the level of loss that we're seeing these days. The predominant three factors are, number one, folks build homes in historic wildfire areas. It's not really much you can do about that other than move the homes or stop building in these areas. The reality is wildfire is a part of the ecosystem here. It's supposed to be. It always has been. It creates healthy forests by having a certain amount of underbrush and dead vegetation burn off every so often. It's similar to homes being built on the beach in Florida and other hurricane areas that have been known to be knocked down by hurricanes year after year. At some point, you simply need to stop building in those locations. The second biggest effect is climate change itself. And climate change is having effects that are not necessarily linear. Obviously, we're having increased temperatures on average. Sure, that definitely has an effect. But there's other more minute effects that have major effects. And that includes the sharpening of the precipitation season. We have more rain in a shorter amount of time, and then sun for a longer period of time, and rotations of seasons around the year, where we now have rain starting later in the season and going to later in the spring. What that means is you actually end up in the late fall in California of having a traditional historic wind system overlapping with really high temperatures and really dry vegetation. That's caused some of the superstorms. Factor number three is forest management. In California, unfortunately, we paused prescribed burns a while ago. And that's because many years ago, a few prescribed burns got out of control and ended up causing losses. But as I mentioned, wildfire is a natural part of the ecosystem. Therefore, we need prescribed burns to be able to burn off dead vegetation and underbrush. Recently, we've started those back up here in California, and state government is putting billions of dollars at this point into managing the forests. So over the last couple of years, we've made a significant amount of progress here in California. And I expect exposure in certain locations across California to actually go down instead of up, because our forest management is actually outpacing the effects of climate change.
And so the mission today is to continue to offer insurance to those who can't get it, or?
That's right. In a lot of ways, we're starting right now by offering policies to folks that live in wildfire affected areas or areas that insurance companies have deserted because they perceive wildfire exposure in those locations. It's a better way of putting it. If you take a step back and sort of look at our vision as a whole, the reality is climate change and some of these other effects, but climate change is breaking industries. And it's not surprising that the industry that takes financial risk to climate-driven catastrophes is the first to be affected. In order to be an effective insurance provider moving forward in the climate that we have now, the insurance provider has to be able to understand climate change. And at this moment, I don't believe that there's any other group out there that does. They're very effective at underwriting the perils that they choose to participate in. But the fact that insurance companies have pulled out of wildfire areas sort of shows what their level of sophistication, their level of understanding of that peril is. And therefore, we've constructed an insurance provider that does understand climate change. So we believe that we can be a dominant insurance provider in climate affected regions moving forward. But more than that, we believe we need to be a dominant insurance provider in climate affected regions in order to make sure that we have an effective solution for consumers that are dealing with this problem.
I love the idea of this deeply scientific, but kind of really human and really holistic solution. I think it's super modern and fantastic to hear. I'll go over to Lewis. From the investor perspective, can you tell us a little bit about how Seraphim first came into contact with Delos and what you liked?
Yeah, should give some context. The original thesis for the fund that was launched back in 2016 was that the falling costs of launch meant that you can finally put up these big satellite constellations. And what we saw was that there was going to be this new digital infrastructure in the sky from space, a lot of different satellites collecting lots of new types of imagery. And so the first few years of the fund were pretty heavily investing in a lot of those startups. So ISI, Pixel, Satellite View. Now, as we've seen that proliferate and now we're collecting those new data sets, bringing them back down to earth, we felt there needed to be some really interesting product businesses that were leveraging those data sets to be used on earth. And so we thought about what applications really made sense. A lot of businesses we were coming across in sort of the downstream analytics space were looking at insurance. It's a big business. They're impacted by climate, and EO data is inherently useful for climate monitoring. So we did a deep dive in the sector, and Delos was one of the businesses that came out of that research that we really wanted to dig into. We connected in 2022 and ended up investing in 2023.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin, but I think, the insurance industry is historically seen as someone who's a bit anti-technology and kind of a bit old-fashioned. So I think this is absolutely so exciting for everyone to hear this, that, that someone's really utilizing technology to disrupt the industry. It's fantastic. Kevin, can you give everyone a little bit of an understanding of the scale of your organization today? For example, how many people you have, what you're intending to perhaps do with your fundraise, that kind of thing.
So at this point in California, we sell home insurance, landlord's insurance, and vacant home insurance, 3 different products out in the market. We're going to end the year with about $75 million in premium sales. That's over 25,000 policies that we have insured at this point. And we're growing very quickly, right? We are insuring another 2,000 to 2,500 homes a month at this point. That's an increase of 6 million or so in premium a month. Going into 2025, we see that as a real opportunity for increasing our scale dramatically. We're starting to get a pretty significant presence across California. Our distribution network, we sell through about 10,000 brokers and 6 insurance carriers that sell our product when they decline because of perceived wildfire exposure. And we want to take the distribution network scale and really lean into that to be able to provide policies as broadly as we can. So we expect to be able to end next year close to 200 million in premium. And that will include additions of high value homes, commercial property, and homes being constructed, a builder's risk policy. So that's what we have in the near term future, and really looking to be the destination for any type of consumer looking for an insurance policy in this sort of stressed region.
I think it's kind of obvious to some people, why this is so important. You're saving people a lot of money, you're saving lives. But in your opinion, why is what Delos is doing so important?
Yeah, coming from outside the insurance industry and entering the insurance industry, everybody inside the insurance industry understands how critical that industry is. Folks outside of it, it tends to be something that you set and forget once a year, once every 6 months. It's part of some requirement of your mortgage, or you have to have it for your car, and you kind of move on. The reality is insurance is incredibly necessary in order to create the economies that we have today. It's the financial dampening mechanism for society. It is 1/8 the GDP of the world, this industry. And we wouldn't be able to operate the way we do now without insurance policies, right? Look at aerospace. People would not launch rockets in space. Nobody would put their satellite on a rocket and launch it into space if there wasn't insurance on that asset. The reality is we wouldn't have the aerospace industry that we have today without insurance. Nobody can take that risk on their balance sheet. They know at that point, say 1 in 5, 10, depending on the level of technology at any given moment, will have some sort of failure. And those failures, without being properly insured, is catastrophic to the company. The company would go out of business. So nobody would go down that route. The sort of same theory applies to the rest of society. The reason why individuals can get up off of the mat after they get knocked down by a catastrophe or a really bad accident or something that really bad happens for their health, the reason why they can be able to move forward and continue to live a regular life is because of the insurance industry. Therefore, looking forward, it's necessary to have an effective insurance industry within the time frame of climate change. And without that, it's going to create so much larger disruption than people sort of realize in society. So being able to solidify and secure this industry to be able to continue doing what it's done historically with this level of loss is incredibly important moving forward.
Lewis, back over to you. What makes Delos stand out from its competition now and when you first found them?
Hard to follow up Kevin after that. What a fantastic vision. And key thing that stood out was really Kevin and Shayna, their grit and tenacity to build a business in a sector that at the time was very new to them. What I really always talk about to really summarize these two very quickly is how they became insurance agents to best learn the problem firsthand. And it's not something you normally see in the space industry, sort of digging deep, getting dirty and learning what the real issues are with these insurance products, both from the insurance side, but also the policyholder side. We reflect on that very positively. But otherwise, lots of businesses we've seen build solutions within the insurance market using geospatial data. We're all just basically developing risk models for an insurer. They were trying to sell sort of SaaS platforms. They were getting stuck in these really long sales cycles that insurers couldn't really trust these models to fully develop programs. And so they struggled to scale. So on the other hand, Delos was very much underwriting insurance. And so if they did it well, they'd be able to scale very, very quickly. And that's what they've been able to demonstrate over the last, 12, 18 months in an extraordinary fashion. And they're able to capture a lot more value because of it rather than an annual recurring contract that it's hard to really capture any value from. Wildfire was also a really interesting peril because it needs to be covered under homeowners insurance policy. So we'd seen a lot of businesses try to develop solutions for flood, and consumers aren't very well educated around what coverage they have with flood, for example. So homeowners, you definitely need it, and therefore it was obviously very important for someone to innovate. And then Delos seemed to go deeper than anyone we'd ever seen around sort of the science and the models that they developed. Their models had been performing in market for years, and so it was true validation rather than just back testing. It was physics-based as well as AI-based, so it's not just churn out black box, see what comes out, which is what a lot of the other people were developing. A lot of it was this black box AI that you didn't know how it was processing it, but it would spit out an answer, and it would overfit against very few events, which was a big risk. On the other hand, the incumbents, it was clear they were bleeding, suffering from very high loss ratios, and the brave ones that stood were expecting them to suffer because they don't really have that science and expertise to know where there is high or low risk. So it's a matter of time that's reflected in loss ratio.
And can you tell everyone a bit about the market size? What's the size of the addressable market?
Sure. I mean, it's relatively straightforward. The market's defined by homes that other people perceive as high risk areas, incumbent insurers run away from those areas where the Delos models say they can write insurance. And the analysis has been done, and worldwide this represents an opportunity of about $92 billion is what the models have spat out, which is obviously a very sizable opportunity, and it always would be in insurance.
Yeah, huge. Kevin, anything to add to that, or has Lewis covered it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. It's kind of unfortunate, right? We did a market sizing at that given moment when we were starting out, 7 years ago, almost 8 at this point, and it came out to be 6 million homes that 18 billion in premium. And once we started to realize what was happening over the last 8 years, we realized that not only has it grown dramatically already, but if you just project like linearly the effect into the future of insurance companies pulling out of areas that have had wildfires, it can get very dramatic very quickly. At this point now, the entire Western US, Western Canada, Australia, et cetera, are in desperate need for some solutions that are able to understand what the wildfire peril. But we're starting to see a lot more activity in South America, in the Mediterranean. Mediterranean is a little bit more historic. And then we're starting to see completely new geographies. Eastern Canada, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Hawaii, obviously, with absolute tragedy recently. So if you start projecting this into the future, it can get pretty scary, honestly, where folks will be struggling. So, we're just happy to be able to provide this solution. We knew it was a need. And as I said, sort of at the beginning, it's more of a need than we had realized. It's become more of an issue across the world than we thought it would be, which really is unfortunate. But we're happy to be here to try to solve that problem.
Yes, definitely much needed, 100%. Kevin, what are some of the exciting milestones coming up for Delos and some of your biggest achievements to date?
It's funny that, Lewis, you mentioned the becoming an insurance agent, because that was, to us, such a no-brainer, right? We came into the insurance industry from outside the industry. What's the best way of learning a new industry? Selling policies, doing it, not studying it, but doing it. So we became licensed brokers, and I'm still a licensed broker. I got my little license number on my business card when I hand it out. And for, it was 3.5 years, I think we just sold home insurance policies out in the woods in the Sierra Nevadas in California. People were struggling. It's a very different consumer profile. It's a very different agent experience, broker experience being out in those regions. So that informs everything we do today. But I suppose that is a milestone along the long arc of Delos at this point. Right now, we are very excited to be in the position that we're in. What we are technically, I keep on saying insurance provider instead of carrier. There's a very important, subtle difference there. And that's the fact that we are a delegated underwriter. We take other large capital insurance companies, reinsurance companies, capital to back the claims of the policies that we write. That's incredibly important because, of course, we want to make sure to honor every single claim that ever comes through the door. And insurance is set up as a risk-sharing ecosystem. Therefore, every group does this. They look to larger pools of capital to make sure that they're going to be able to honor all of their policies. But these are some of the same groups that had misunderstood wildfire to begin with, that were experiencing all the losses because they didn't have that level of sophistication. So being able to go into that environment and convince them, hey, you guys weren't quite doing it right before, but that's okay because we've been able to develop something new. It took a lot of time and a lot of validation because these folks by far and away are not wildfire experts. So from their perspective, very understandably, they need to make sure that they are putting up large amounts of capital for a catastrophic risk to a group that is not selling snake oil, that actually legitimately has a better way of looking at this risk. So that took years, frankly, to be able to get in that position. But now we have 6 different capital partners backing us, and we should be adding a handful of others before January 1st. And that accumulates in the capital backing to write $200 million of premium in the calendar year 2025, which is obviously a dramatically larger scale than we were able to achieve in previous years. So that for us is our biggest achievement. And of course, we need to honor that and write profitable portfolios, do our job in terms of understanding the peril correctly, pricing the peril correctly, underwriting it correctly. And if we're able to do that, we see that amount of capital growing dramatically in 2026 and onward.
I read something that I really liked that, from the human side and the scientific side that we touched on earlier, where, you actually, you've been going out to communities and you've been talking to them. And if you weren't able to insure them, you've been helping them, get a resilience grant. And, I think, so you're really involved with the area and the people, which I think is, really, really great.
Yeah, it comes back to our vision. It also comes back to a little bit of our structure. So we've talked about our sophistication on our modeling. Where that comes from is Delos is actually partnered with an environmental think tank. This think tank is named the Spatial Informatics Group. They're over 100 professors, postdocs, scientists, researchers. They've co-created a lot of the civil government models. They've done work for CAL FIRE, the firefighting department, the U.S. Forestry Service, the Public Utilities Commission. So they're doing massive amounts of research every single year, directly connecting with communities. We actually got in touch with them because we got close to the firefighting department here in California. So part of our ongoing mission is not only to be able to serve policy holders, but also serve society in general. So we're constantly talking to firefighting departments across California through the Spatial Informatics Group and also ourselves about what our analytics have been able to show, about what the best defensive techniques could be, what the best hardening techniques, force management techniques can be. They have a lot of sophistication around this themselves as well. The firefighting department does an excellent job in California, but any help that we can provide, we look to provide that help. It also allows these groups to understand, hey, my constituency is struggling with an insurance problem. And if we change these three variables, then these communities can get affordable insurance as opposed to not as they are right now. And that makes a dramatic difference to everybody involved.
At Seraphim, we always love to back visionary founders. And this question is tricky for a product like yours, I feel, because, I would normally ask, what was your vision for a future when Delos is a huge success? And obviously we don't want more fires, but we want these people to be safe and covered. So how you rationalize that, I don't know, but I would love to hear that answer.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate view of the future, frankly, right? We live in a world and we all at this point have skin and eyes, right? We feel the difference on these catastrophes. A decade ago, 2 decades ago, we were looking at it, we're calling global warming at that point, and there's a lot of people raising the alarm and a lot of folks not paying enough attention. And sort of saying, if it is an effect, let's not worry about it. And a lot of people saying it's not happening. Well, now we're seeing the dramatic rise in wildfires and hurricanes and floods and hail and weird winter storms that affect the southern U.S. And we live it now. And I unfortunately believe the best potential outcome of reversing the effects of climate change is no longer possible. I do think the worst is potentially no longer possible, but who knows? That really depends on what we do as a species, moving into the future over the next couple of decades. Either way around it, it's a reality. And we're going to need to learn how to live in a world with these increased disasters, with these increased wildfires. So my vision for the future is that we can learn to effectively live in these situations. Best case scenario, I believe, is we're able to curtail the worst effects and bring this back to an environment that is difficult but livable into the future. And therefore, we need to have certain industries be able to be effective in that new reality. My vision for the future is that the insurance industry will be able to continue to provide effective service for folks going through disasters, which will never be more important than in that world of increased disasters.
Fantastic. Thank you for explaining that really important work and such an important mission. Thank you for joining me today. That's it from me. And thank you to Lewis as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
We are Seraphim.